Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Boarding schools were first set up in medieval times. For centuries, they've been both loathed and praised, bastions of Britishness and educational excellence, or the cruel forced separation of small children from their family homes. In his new book, Stiff Upper Lip, the journalist Alex Renton describes his torment at being sent away to board at the age of just 8. But he also documents the years of physical and sexual abuse that he says he suffered in school. Alex agreed to return to his old boarding school with me to talk about his time there. A warning, this interview does contain elements that some viewers may find upsetting. 1969. Alex Renton, at just 8 years old, is dispatched to board at Ashdown House, a feeder school for Eton to which he subsequently went. Despite a facade by the architect who designed the White House and its setting in sumptuous Sussex countryside, Alex was to suffer years of physical, mental and sexual abuse here. These days, Ashdown House is a thriving school run by a completely new trust who say the welfare of their pupils is at the heart of everything they do. The school gave us permission to bring Alex back to discuss what he endured here over 40 years ago.
These are dormitories, the two at the top. That was the headmaster's drawing room, sitting room, it still is.
And these were all the old playing fields?
Yeah, and a lot of golf. He was keen on golf.
What does it feel like, Alex, to be here again?
It's bloody horrible. I really... Oh, man. I mean, it's horrible. It's a sunny day in a beautiful place, and I was very unhappy here for too long for a small child, and it took me too long to get over it.
When it came to coming to terms with what actually happened to you,
yes,
it took you an extraordinarily long time.
Yes, and I carry some guilt about that. It took me 40 years to acknowledge the fact that I had been sexually abused by a man now dead called Mr. Keane, and then to find out that because my mother had made a complaint, but basically been bullied into keeping quiet. No one went to the police, so Mr. Keane was, I assume, sacked by the school, but the school bulletin for 1972 says he went on to teach at another school. I and my parents could have prevented 40 years in which I have to suspect he might have abused other children. And that's, for me, a guilt, and it's also a source of great anger because the school should have done it.
But do you think, in fact, that the educational process in these institutions perhaps put the lid on it, actually ensured that you didn't talk about it?
We were trained from day one to keep our mouths shut. Talking to your parents was sneaking, according to the old headmaster. And at the end of my first half term, one of the boys in my dormitory told his parents that we were being beaten at night if we cried, because there was a school rule against noise after lights out. And we were summoned into the headmaster's office, just down there, the morning after the half term, and he said, "A boy has been talking to his parents. If this happens again, I shall beat every one of you." And that was all that was done. So we, and the whole society that went through this, were trained very early that you keep secrets within the team. And you have to ask whether the cover-ups we were trained to see as normal at this age then infected the way the graduates of this system run the whole of society.
When you were here, did you recognise in some way that you were in the elite?
No, I don't think at 8 years old you think like that. What I knew chiefly was that I wasn't with people who loved me, and actually some who seemed to actively not love me, rather the opposite. Here you were just a frightened child like anyone else.
Frightened of what?
I think from the very first moment your name was taken away. I was called Renton, and that people older than me, both adults and older children, did not want anything good for me. They wanted to make me stop crying, which they do with a stick, and they wanted to mould me into someone who would be an uncomplaining member of a team, not the individual I had been till 8 years old.
An anthropologist would think it very strange that a whole segment of British society, that actually at the top, regarded removing the child from the home as a vital ingredient to making them great?
Well, by the time I got here, it had been proven to work. I mean, Wellington had said 150 years earlier, supposedly, that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. And in the 1960s, when I arrived, we were still, one of the top countries, and we'd had in the world's view, a great empire. And the magic provided by schools like this, including that unique thing in human anthropology of separating children at 8 years old, clearly produced leaders who could run an empire.
I mean, your argument is detaching from the family at 8 cannot be good.
Well, it can be good. It's very good at making people reattach, because children need somewhere to place their affections, to a team, to the club, to the network, to the empire, if you like. So, in fact, long before child psychology, it looks like the Victorians developed a brilliant system for building a core of officers and leaders. So it's bad psychologically for the child, it's good for the team.
I put it to you that most of the parents of children who've been through schools like this reckon they're doing the very best for their children.
Yes.
They are using their money to ensure that their children get what they see as a good education and have the best possible prospects of making it in life.
Absolutely, and I know these parents. They're my relatives, they're my class, and they're still doing it. And they're often scrimping, saving in their terms. I'm not taking foreign holidays because the bills are enormous. And so it's a sacrifice, and it's done with love. One of the awful things about it, though, is if you tell a child we've scrimped and saved to give you this great chance, the child's not going to tell you it's going wrong. Children try to protect their parents. So you're already setting up a dynamic where the child has to stiffen its upper lip and put its head down and get through misery and bullying and possibly worse to keep its parents happy. What I can see, because these people write to me, often 50 years after they were at the school, is that they've lived lifetimes often of great success, but deep inner turmoil and unhappiness. And they've made a lot of people around them unhappy as well.
And you're a happy person because you've now finally come to terms with what you endured.
Yes, I think speaking up about it was the best therapy, and I'd encourage everyone else who did to do so. And yeah, I've arrived at Touchwood, a place where, with the support of my family, which, is pretty crucial, I'm a happy person. I'm glad to be sitting here, able to say that 43 years later.
Alex Renton. Well, now, Ashdown House School has said in a statement, these historic incidents, which occurred 25 years before the Trust took over the school, are deeply shocking and are against everything we stand for. We extend our heartfelt sympathy to anyone involved. Joining us now to discuss some of the issues raised in that interview is Professor Joy Chavarin, author of Boarding School Syndrome, and Julie Robinson, General Secretary of the Independent Schools Council. Professor Chavarin, what effect does taking a child away from the family, let's say at 8 years old, as Alex was, have? Can you generalise, or it's specific to the individual?
Well, it's specific to the individual, but it is also something you can generalise about, because children grow up in a situation where they're attached to people, they're loved, they are familiar with their environment, their family, their siblings, their pets, their toys, and suddenly they're put into an environment with complete strangers, and that is a terrible breaking of attachments. And when children are as young as 7 or 8, it is actually such a shock because the children just lose everything. So children like that are exiled. I say they're exiled from their family, and they're also bereaved because
But they also have, surely, a new attachment, which is training, perhaps, for empire. I mean, for attachment to the big business, to Parliament, or wherever else it is. I mean, surely, having lost the family, then attach themselves to the institution, and thereafter attach themselves to all sorts of other institutions in which they do very well.
Well, they do, and they run the country, but basically they're a group of bereaved people, people who've lost...
Our country is run by bereaved people?
I think so. Traumatised children, a lot of them, because they lost everything at such an early age. Intimate relationships become very difficult. Empathy becomes very difficult. Children of that age in boarding school are taught not to feel their emotions, so they're not expected to empathise with themselves, and nobody empathises. Come on, get on with it, you'll be okay, is what they're taught.
Do you treat people with this syndrome?
I do.
Because, I mean, Alex says in that interview, the best thing is to talk about it.
Yeah.
Does it work? I mean, can you bring people back?
Yes, I think you can, and I think that's the optimistic thing. But it is connecting people up with that child, that bereaved child. So somebody who's a very successful adult may also be carrying a bereaved child within them. And what happens when they come into therapy, they often come because they're depressed or their relationships are not working out. And often intimate relationships.
Just very briefly,
difficult.
I mean, sometimes the parent is bereaved too. I know my mother was bereaved.
Absolutely.
When I went, she would cry every time we left the station.
And I think if mothers pay attention to how they feel, they'll understand how their children feel.
It's a different question, really, to you, because, Julie, I'm just wondering, now there are weekend breaks, there are all sorts of ways in which you try to keep the family involved.
Yes, this portrayal of these schools bears no resemblance to the modern day school. These are really happy places now where children are listened to, and an awful lot has happened over the last 40 years to ensure that children have a voice, to ensure that staff are properly checked before they arrive. We've been working with agencies such as Childline and child protection agencies, with local children's services, and schools do all they possibly can to put the well-being and welfare of children at the very top.
But if we listen to Joy Shaverin, what she's saying is the problem is, of course, they've lost their families.
Yes, yes. What Professor Shaverin is describing is children being disconnected from their families. But in the boarding school that I ran and the boarding houses where I was working, the parents were very, very involved. Because times have changed now. There's a culture of listening to children and putting children first. So our parents were very involved.
But there's no more night-night mummy.
Well, the nature of boarding has also changed. There are 75,000 boarders in the country, of which the majority are in sixth forms preparing for university life. Only 2% of them are very young, and those youngsters tend to be part-time boarders, flexi-boarders.
Only 2% would go at 8 to a prep school.
Very few go at 8, very few, and hardly any under that. And those who go are still connected with their families. They can still, on the whole, they still have Sunday lunch with the family, and they come into school for part of the time. So it's not the case that they're completely separated from their family.
What about the idea that we discussed, which was that bereaved people run the country?
Well, I think it's important to remember that, as you said, parents want the best for their children. So we've got a generation of people now who, many of them are still sending their children to the best school they can. We've got a generation of good people wanting the best for their children. These very same people are supporting the modern way of providing childcare and providing education, which is a focus on welfare and well-being, lots of soft skills, lots of communication skills. So if it is the case that these awful past experiences have affected them, they are in a position now to put that right by ensuring that all the right policies are followed now.
Briefly, do you detect that the public school system is understanding some of the damage?
I think it's understanding some of the damage, but you cannot look after children when they are alone at night. Bullying still takes place, and it depends on the adults that are there and the other children that they're exposed to.
Professor Shaverin, alas, that's where we must leave it. And thank you very much, Julie Robinson, too. Thank you both.
I've been getting away with it all